is over.
Hello, everybody. Again, we are here for the hot tag segment. So I am going to hand it off to Brandi and tag Brandi in. Brandi, are you ready to go?
I am ready for the hot tag, Joe.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, let's get you tagged in. And I know you polled our community, right? So you asked them who they wanted to hear about, and then you also asked them what their favorite gimmick was. And I'll shout out a few of the names there when we get going. So they wanted you to talk about the $1 Million Man. So what have you got for the community?
And that's so cool because I had pretty much in my mind gotten it down to the Big Boss Man, the $1 Million Man. And you know, you said we're going with the $1 Million Man. And so my biggest question for you guys is, do you have a price for the $1 Million Man?
Everybody's got a price for the $1 Million Man. Oh, man, that's great. One of my favorite characters, actually. I've always loved the $1 Million Man. One of the best heels, I think, of the 1980s.
Absolutely. One of the best characters, especially in that kind of larger-than-life, cartoonish sort of era of the 80s and early 90s.
Definitely.
And I think, you know, if he wanted to, he could have made that character a babyface. But he was just such a good heel. It was one of those things you certainly didn't want to miss. And the first time I remember seeing him was WrestleMania 5. And I don't think I got the scope of the character until I was a little older. But I just remember he's got this larger-than-life belt, this larger-than-life personality, and he just completely overshone Brutus the Barber Beefcake in that match.
Yes. Brutus the Barber. There's another classic. The $1 Million belt was an entity in itself.
Yes. Yes. And you know, Beefcake was Hogan's Virgil. So
yes,
you know,
he was.
We'll
He was. Both they were very good friends too outside of wrestling. I believe.
I know.
If I remember correctly. Yeah.
I know. Okay, so if we're going to talk about the $1 Million Man, we have to talk about Ted Dibiase first. And Daze requested that I sprinkle in some NWA knowledge, so I did a little research, and so I'm going to just sprinkle some in here and there until, you know, we decide to maybe do a full segment on it. But, all right, Daze, the NWA began in 1948 as sort of an umbrella unification organization for the different territories at the time. And its first unified champion was Luthez.
Wow.
Okay, so there's our NWA moment.
There you go.
And you know, I think about that era of kind of territory, you know, going back and forth to each territory, even though you're all kind of under that NWA umbrella. And I think of how difficult it must have been for Ted DiBiase's dad, because he was adopted by it would have been his stepfather. They called him Iron Mike DiBiase, and Ted's mother was also a wrestler. So he's second generation, and then you've got Ted Jr., who was third generation. So, you know, we focused on legacy, you know, a good bit last week, and you have it here again.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I knew. What's with the name Iron Mike? I remember a wrestler in the 80s. What was it? Iron Mike Sharp, the guy that always wore that thing on his wrist that you used to hit people with.
Didn't they call Tyson Iron Mike too?
Yes, they did. Yeah, that must be a thing.
Yeah. I don't know. But I mean, Ted, he unfortunately had to go through the experience of losing his father, who actually died in the ring when Ted was 15 years old.
Oh, wow. I didn't know
He had
that.
a heart attack.
Wow.
And one of the Funk brothers, I couldn't tell because of the voice, you know, they sound so similar, but it was either Terry or Dory. And they said, you know, that night they were supposed to wrestle, but they had just come off the road and, you know, needed a night off. And you know, he said, no, I can't do the match tonight. And so Iron Mike Dibiase went in for him and had a heart attack in the ring.
Wow.
And like I said, I couldn't tell the difference because of the voice, but one of the Funk brothers said, you know, it's something that he'll never forget.
I'm sure. Yeah, that's got to be tragic. And how old did you say he was? 15 when that happened?
Yeah, Ted was 15. Mm-hmm.
Wow, man.
And, you know, his mother kind of went downhill a good bit after that. And Ted eventually found his way into the wrestling business. He was trained by the Funk brothers. He also went to West Texas State University, which, you know, they came out of, Dusty came out of, Tito Santana came out of. So there's a real wrestling legacy, not only in Texas, but that specific university. And here's a little bit of trivia for you guys. Who do you think Hogan faced first in Madison Square Garden?
Wow, the first person, oh, man. Yikes. That's a good question. If I had a venture guess, I mean, going back to that point in time, well, I don't know. I know he wrestled he beat Iron Sheik for the title. Man, wow, I don't know. I couldn't even have a guess. There's probably so many different people it could have been. I don't know. I honestly don't know. Do you know, Jeff?
My guess would be Bob Backlund.
Nope. He faced Ted DiBiase in MSG in 1979, and it was Hogan's first MSG appearance.
Wow, no kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
And cool. He, I guess that would have been the WWF at that point. And then Ted leaves, and he works in Japan for, you know, a few years in the 80s. And I did not know this. He tagged frequently with Stan Hansen.
Okay.
Can you imagine that tag team?
Wow, no kidding. Yeah, I think I knew that he did have that he did team up with him, but yeah, that would have been amazing. That was probably when I was still a little bit I was probably just getting into wrestling then. So I was probably maybe 7 or 8 back then when I was watching it. So I probably wouldn't remember as much of it then, but yeah, that's awesome.
Right. I've heard JBL say, you know, Stan was half blind, so you just kind of stood in the ring and waited for that arm to find you and hope that it got you in the right place. And
oh, man.
That's probably my favorite Stan Hansen kind of joke. But
that's great.
After Japan, you know, DiBiase, he went to Mid-South, which was under the, you know, umbrella. And he had a lot of interesting matches I didn't know about. He did a lot with, oh gosh. My mind just went blank. He did a lot with the guy with the 2x4.
Hacksaw Jim Duggan.
Thank you, God almighty.
That's okay.
Yeah. Hacksaw Jim Duggan. And this is the funny thing. They had a lot of gimmick matches. You know, they would have a coal miner's glove on a pole or a tuxedo match or a cage match. So they have this big match, you know, and it's every gimmick you could possibly throw at it. It's a tuxedo match. It's in a cage. There's no disqualifications. And they just went at each other. And so after that, the Mid-South territory was going to be bought by Jim Crockett Promotions. And Ted wasn't necessarily sure if he wanted to stay there. And he tries to work out a deal. Then he hears from Vince Jr. in New York. He says, look, if you sign with me, I have a gimmick for you. But I'm not going to tell you the gimmick until you sign. And so he thought about it, and he called Terry Funk, and he said, what should I do? And Terry said, Ted, if New York has something for you, you better pack your bags.
Wow.
And that's what he did. And he went to New York, and he did not find out what the gimmick was until he signed with WWF, and he found out about the $1 Million Man. And if you think about if that hadn't happened, I thought about who possibly could have played that character. And unless you count Vince McMahon, I think the only other person who could do it is Ric Flair.
Yeah, good call. Good call. Because they both have similar traits. With the high fly, the styling and profiling. They just did it in different ways. But that's a great call.
But in doing my research, I heard a producer from that time who had gone to the WWE shortly before Ted DiBiase, and he was thinking about the gimmick and knew that Ted was going to be a guy for it, but he couldn't quite wrap his mind around it. And he and Vince are on an airplane one day, and this is 1987. Back then, you could smoke on airplanes. And so they're in first class, and there's this guy behind them, and the row behind them was the smoking section. That cracks me up. And so Vince goes, "Hey, I'll give you $100 if you put your cigarette out." And the guy's like, "No, I'm good. I'm good." And Vince goes, "I'll give you $500 if you put your cigarette out." The guy goes, "No, I'm just relaxing. I want to have my cigarette." And Vince finally says, "I will pay for your seat and still give you $500 if you put your cigarette out." The guy puts the cigarette out, looks to this particular producer, and is like, "See, pal, everybody's got a price." And he said, that's when it really clicked. Vince is the $1 Million Man.
Wow.
I know.
That's awesome. And the origin of the story, that's really awesome.
I love it.
That's awesome.
And you really can't think about, Ted was an incredible in-ring performer, but you can't think about the $1 Million Man character without thinking about the vignettes. And Virgil was with him from the start. Virgil's real name is Mike Jones. And they first met in Vince's office. And I believe that the name Virgil was, a rib against Dusty. People kind of go back and forth. And I think there was payback with that too, because later when Mike Jones went to WCW, he was Vincent. So,
yep.
So there you go. But do you guys remember the first vignette of the $1 Million Man?
I'd love to say that I do. I remember so many of his vignettes, but I don't. Again, that's fuzzy to me because that's going back a good way. So no, I don't. You'd have to remind me.
The first one, it's Vincent and it's too late, guys. It's Virgil and $1 Million Man in the limo, and Ted's counting the money, trying to figure out what he's going to buy. He gets a paper cut from the money. He insists to Virgil, "I have to go to the hospital. I have to go to the hospital, get this taken care of." And so Virgil takes him to the emergency room, and Ted ends up having to buy the nurse off to let him back into the emergency room.
Oh, God.
And so that was the first $1 Million Man vignette. And then, of course, you have the more famous ones where they're at the pool. And these were legit people. This happened in Dallas, Texas. He goes to a public pool, and they just film it there. Luckily, there's kids there. There's the guy who's watching the pool. He just buys them off. and after it was over, one of the producers said to DiBiase, he said, "Now, don't you think if the $1 Million Man was really going to buy off a pool, he'd buy off a better pool?"
Oh, man, that's great.
I love
That's
it.
Great. That's great.
And then, of course, there's the one where they're picking people out of the crowd. And at first, it's before, he kind of steps in and stops things before they can get the money. But at first, they were picking people out of the crowd, and they were getting to do things, and they'd get the money. Well, it started to get over. And so they had to figure out a way to make him that more evil heel, and to make it where the people who they just picked out of the crowd wouldn't get the money. And it was Vince's idea to do the basketball vignette.
Okay.
Where the little kid, they pick out of the crowd, and this is a shoot. They just pick somebody out of the crowd and say, okay, I want you to dribble this basketball 15 times. And right at the end there, Ted just kind of kicks it out of the way and goes, oh, if you don't do the job, you don't get paid. And, there's tears running down the little kid's face, and the mom is looking at him like, how can you do this to my son? Of course, afterwards, they gave him some money, but that's how he really started to become that heel character we know and love. And then he would, there's the woman who would bark like a dog and try to earn the money, but all she would say was rough. And so, of course, she wouldn't get the money. And there's one vignette where he wrestles a match, and a little kid comes out of the crowd, and he takes his boot off after the match, and he says, I'll give you this much money to kiss my foot. And that little boy was Rob Van Dam.
Oh, no kidding.
Really?
Oh, man. Yes. Wow.
Yes.
Oh, man, that's great.
And then, of course, during this time, after Ted beats an opponent, that's when they start stuffing the hundreds into the opponent's mouth.
Yes.
And then, Virgil would come and snatch it out.
Yep.
And his first WrestleMania was WrestleMania 4. He appeared in the first SummerSlam. And then they really get into this angle that I really love. It's the Mega Bucks versus the Mega Powers.
Yes.
And Ted buys off Andre, and says, give me the title. And so when this happened, it was main event, I believe, with the identical referees. And Andre says, I've gotten you the tag team title. And if you go back and look at it, he really does say the tag title instead of the championship title. Oh. And that just cracks me up. And Ted was acknowledged for a little while, maybe just a couple weeks, as the champion. Now, of course, it's not acknowledged anymore, but they then, for the next WrestleMania, had a tournament to crown the champion.
Yes, that's right. I remember that.
Yes.
I remember that. Now, didn't he did something with The Undertaker too, right?
Hold on.
Okay, I'm jumping ahead.
She's getting there.
She's jumping ahead.
That was my next thing.
Okay.
There was a Survivor Series match, and Dibiase's team was going to have a secret partner, and he debuts The Undertaker, as he's, paid this guy to come in, and he's his secret weapon. And my favorite line from that entire show is Taker is coming out, and Monsoon is just, oh my. And Piper goes, look at the size of that ham hock.
Oh, yes.
Just one of the best lines in wrestling history.
Yes.
And eventually, Taker ends up with Paul Bearer, but they were going to put Taker with Brother Love, and he was going to be Kane the Undertaker.
Yes. Yep.
I can't imagine what Taker would be if Brother Love had been his manager. But speaking of him, it was revealed in a Brother Love episode eventually that the $1 Million Man was his benefactor.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I remember that. Yep, I do remember that. Yep.
And about the $1 Million belt, there's a vignette where he goes to the jewelry store in Greenwich, Connecticut, and the person who did the belt was Vince's personal jeweler.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
and
crazy.
So the guy has the belt ready, and they go in and they think, oh, it's going to be this great thing. It really does have real gold. It really does have real diamonds. Most of what you see on the front is cubic zirconia, but they get there, and the belt is about the size. The big plate is about the size of what you would see with an Elvis belt, not with a championship title belt. So they had to bring in the championship title to give the jeweler the scope of this is what it should be. And the $1 Million belt was born.
Man. wonder if did they ever make a replica of that belt?
I don't know, but I know it's not certain if it's still in WWE's possession.
Okay.
You know, Ted leaves the company in 1993, and I'll backtrack a little bit. And, you know, a few years later, Daze, stay seated, Linda calls.
Dope.
And says, Ted, we need the belt back. And he said, I gave it to somebody in the ring crew. And so it's not very clear if it's in a safe somewhere in Greenwich, Connecticut, or if it's lost.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, Ted went to WCW then, right?
He did. He left the WWE in 1993 for personal reasons. And by this time, he had been a tag team champion with your favorite father and mine, Erwin R. Shyster.
Ooh, IRS. Very nice.
Yes. Absolutely love that tag team.
Yes.
And he has to come off the road. He has to deal with some personal issues. And if you want to know more about his story, please check out The Price of Fame. I listened to it more than once this week, and it was such an emotional documentary to me. He does it along his wife, you know, is in it. Some people that have meant something to him over the years. Ted Jr.'s in it, his son Brett. And, you know, we're older, so we understand a little bit more maybe than some of the people who are in the chats. They're younger, they're in their teens, they're in their 20s. And we look up to these individuals and we put them on pedestals. You know, like I can remember as a teenager being absolutely in love with Shawn Michaels. But I had no idea what his life was like at the time. And, you know, we put these people up on pedestals. How many people, you know, were yellow and red and saying their prayers and taking their vitamins, and you weren't exactly sure who you were looking up to. And Ted talks about in the documentary about, you know, the higher you are, the harder you fall. And that was the case for him. And he had been unfaithful in his marriage. He had not been the husband and father that he should have been. And he left the business. He went home to fix this marriage. And I think that's a wonderful example of redemption. I think it's something that we can all identify with on some level. And, you know, I think he really can be looked up to as a little kid's hero, because he's doing what is right. Ultimately, he's not choosing fame over family, and he gave it all up. Eventually, he would go back to Japan for a year or so, team up again with Stan Hansen. Then he goes to WCW, but he's not doing as many dates as he was in the WWF. There's not as many demands on his time.
Right.
And he admits to having, you know, struggles even through this time, but it was never to the point as it was in the 1980s and the early 90s. And when he goes to WCW, he premieres as the fourth member of the NWO.
Yep.
So
I remember that.
You think about the scope of that. Your first two members are Hall and Nash. Then you've got Hogan.
Yep.
And number 4 is Ted DiBiase. That's somebody's Mount Rushmore.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He came in as he came in as a benefactor for them too.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The idea was that he was going to be the person who financed the NWO. And, you know, once the story goes, once Eric Bischoff sees how over this is, he decides he wants to be in that role, in that speaking role, where DiBiase was brought in to do that for them. So, you know, he's with the NWO for a while. Then he kind of does some commentary and some behind the scene things for WCW. And then he's gone in 99.
Yep.
He makes some, you know, one-off visits to the WWE after this, you know, several Raw reunion shows. Of course, he's the one who introduces Ted Jr. But Ted did go back to the WWE for a short period before he ends up in WCW. And he began the corporate, the $1 Million Corporation.
Yep.
And to me, my favorite person that he managed was the ringmaster.
Oh my.
Go
Wow.
back and watch one of Stone Cold's matches for when he was the ringmaster. And, you know, Ted has appointed him the $1 Million Champion. And it's wonderful wrestling drama. Absolutely wonderful wrestling drama. During this time, he also managed Sid, but, you know, I wasn't sure I was going to mention that.
Man.
But
Unbelievable.
Stone Cold, I believe, was the last $1 Million Champion.
There you go.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. What a career.
And,
that's crazy.
Yes. And he began a ministry in 99, maybe early 2000. Anyway, it's in that time period. And that's what he's devoted his life to ever since. You know, he loves his wrestling legacy. He loves his family. But he's gone out and he's told his story. And, you know, there's no counting how many lives have been changed because of it. And I think he's to be admired for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And if you watch the documentary, to me, the real hero in the story, other than, you know, the personality that we all look up to, is his wife. And she talks about, you know, she was committed to her children and she was committed to her marriage, and he just had to show her the same commitment. And I thought it was a beautiful story.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love the look behind the scenes of things, because, you know, again, you don't get it. And I know you mentioned that, you know, you read a lot of these books and stuff like that, and you really wouldn't get any of that unless you watch either some of the documentaries or you read the books about these guys, because you wouldn't really know it. I mean, I had no idea. I had no idea that his father passed away when he was so young. I didn't know that he passed away in the ring, all that kind of stuff. That's fascinating.
There's this scene at the end of The Price of Fame, and Ted Jr. is with him, and it's, you know, he's telling his dad, "I'm sorry, I haven't been in a while, and I've had these things happen in my life, Dad, and ultimately, you know, I just want to make you proud."
Wow.
And it's this really poignant moment. And Ted Jr. had never been to the grave of his grandfather. And, you know, I think it's one of those things all of us can identify with at some point.
Sure.
You know, all of us have wanted to make someone proud.
Absolutely.
And it was a really beautiful look into their life. And I know that Ted has written a couple of books. They are not available on audio. But, you know, I got a lot of information from, you know, some of these old clips, from documentaries, you know, those types of things. And he's been very open about his story. He's been very open. And of course, he was inducted into the Hall of Fame by his sons, Ted Jr. and Brett, in 2010. And it's an absolutely deserved spot.
Yep. I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember that. Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I again, great look back, and an absolute legend of the business.
Yes.
I can remember he played that role so well, because when I was watching him, you know, of course, I was enthralled by the faces, and I hated the heels, and that's exactly what you were supposed to do. And I, you know, I can remember, I loathed the $1 Million Man. I hated him. And that, but again, he played that part so well that you just could not stand when the guy was there. And no matter who they wrestled, you wanted to see them beat him. And yeah, he just did an amazing job. And like I said, one of the best heels in the 1980s for sure.
Absolutely. And if you really want to see a fabulous example of him as a heel, go back and look at the feud, I believe it was 1990, between him and Virgil versus Dusty and Dustin at that point.
Man.
Fabulous chemistry, fabulous promos, fabulous match. You know, he ultimately will buy the services of Sapphire and further inflame this angle with Dusty. And it was fantastic. And the whole time, you know, Virgil is Virgil.
Virgil was a trip. I met Virgil actually.
Really?
Yeah, in the 1990s, he was up in a mall that I was working in. I was a manager of a Radio Shack then, and I can remember we had a bunch of TVs in the front of the store, and I remember we had football games on. And all of a sudden, he comes in the store. Now we knew he was around because he was signing autographs, I think, somewhere close. And he comes in and he's just kind of hanging out in the front. And we walk around, and one of my representatives is like, "That's Virgil from WWE." And I'm looking over and I'm like, "Yeah, you're right. That is." So we go over and he comes over and he's like, "You all mind if I watch the football games over here?" And we're like, "Nah, go right ahead. You're good."
That's great.
So yeah, that's really awesome. That's really awesome. I mean, again, as a heel, how can you beat money? That's the thing. When that was his shtick. You couldn't beat him because he can buy anything.
Exactly.
So you can't beat that. It's like a good villain in a book. I mean, if that villain is a millionaire or a billionaire, it's very, very hard to beat that villain because he's got unlimited resources. So yeah, that's awesome.
If he can buy Andre the Giant, I think he can pretty much buy anything.
That's it. Yep. And I mean, look at it. Two people in that so Andre and then Undertaker. I mean, of all the people in the world you could buy, there you go. Speaking of which, Brandi, the community, yeah, that's a good segue because the community voted. You asked them as well who their favorite gimmick was, and they voted for The Undertaker. So shocker, right?
Yes. I'm excited.
Yeah. Let's see. We had Liam Costa. He said the best wrestling gimmick is easily The Undertaker. We had Nails and NY. She said the same thing. Jaden Dodd said, for me, it has to be Undertaker. Yoshi says, Yoshi loved your segment, Brandi. Yoshi thinks you're a twin.
That's so cool.
Yoshi says, I hope Brandi sees this. You're awesome. Love the hot tag. Really enjoyed it. Can't wait for more. James Chadwick says has to be The Undertaker. Jackson Oak said Mick Foley. I'm sure you would have liked that one too.
Woohoo!
Yeah, says Mick Foley.
Right.
And then so there you go. So The Undertaker is their favorite gimmick. So, and I know Brandi said she's gonna have a hard time talking about The Undertaker because The Undertaker's career can take up several shows.
I think we'll be talking about him until next month.
Yeah, it's hard not to. That's a legendary career, and very, very difficult to review that. So that's awesome. Well, listen, thank you so much for the look back at Ted DiBiase. Again, like I said, one of my favorite villains of all time in wrestling. So that was amazing. Love the look back. And before we head out, do you have a book you want to recommend for this week to the guys?
Even though I haven't read it, but everybody go back and see if you can find Ted DiBiase's books. I think they would be worth a read. Go back and check out that documentary. And I want to say for Jody, I believe that Bray is this new generation's Undertaker. So that's,
Wow, that's a big thing. Yeah.
We can look into that some more, but that's what I think.
Jody wants to get you on an Abby's window, so we'll have to make that happen.
Love it. I would absolutely love it.
Jody said we've got to get you on a show, so there you go. We'll definitely make that happen. That's awesome.
I don't even have to be in the window. Just put me behind a door and I'm good.
Oh, my goodness. That's great. That's awesome. Well, listen, Brandi, that's awesome. And again, thank you for joining us on our show. We love it. I know the guys all loved it as well. They love that look back and look at all these classic wrestlers and stuff. So we will have Brandi back with us again next week as well, guys, as always. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week, Brandi.
Thank you. Tag me out, guys.